Hi. So my name's Jess, and I thought I might take you through my endometriosis surgery, my surgery prep, my diagnosis, and I guess just how we got to here, or how I got to here, really. Um, so at the moment it is the 29th of April 2026, and I am going in for a laparoscopy surgery tomorrow, with the idea that we'll do some endometriosis excision, and I guess anything else that pops up that's needed. I also have a couple of comorbidities. So I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, I have type 2 diabetes, and so I guess if they see anything in there that might be related to my polycystic, they'll either make a note or do something. I'm also getting a hysteroscopy, a DNC, and a new marina put in. I have had those three things done before, multiple times. Once in like 2019, and then in 2024 when my first marina ran out, I got a new marina. But to do excision surgery and a laparoscopy, they need to remove the one that's there currently, and then we'll want to replace it during/after the surgery. So yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at the moment. And I guess I can run you back through my past, how I got to where I am now with the diagnosis. So I will start with when I was a kid, what I experienced when I was a teenager, what I got diagnosed with then, and what I might have unintentionally ignored over time that caused me to be diagnosed so much later in life than ideally 15 years ago. That being said, endometriosis is something that typically takes a lot of people a long time to be diagnosed with. There are some systemic issues in women's health, and unfortunately that's kind of one of them. So yeah, let's head back to, I guess, when I was 9. These stories will be a little bit TMI, so I apologise in advance if that's something you're uncomfortable with. It's just given the nature, I guess, of endometriosis and women's health that some of this will be a little TMI. Alright, so going back, I started my periods when I was 9, turning 10, about 2 weeks before my 10th birthday, which for a lot of girls is relatively early, though I am aware that in my family, particularly on my mother's side, that is somewhat typical. And from what I've learnt since, a lot of the women on my mother's side also have had issues with their menstrual cycles, their periods, and having spoken to my mum and understanding her journey or her health growing up and some of her siblings, I would, and her own mother, so my grandmother, I would guess that some of them had endometriosis as well. None diagnosed that I'm aware of, but we are also talking years ago when we didn't have as good technology. So got my period when I was 9, and since I got it, it was pretty heavy. I would bleed anywhere from 7 days to a month and a half long. Everything that I read at the time, everything that anyone had said to me other than my mum, was that periods should last 2 to 3, 2 to 5 days, and that they'd be uncomfortable. And they are. The information at school, the information, I was going to say through friends, but I was the first of my friends to get my period. But through teachers and like the sick bay had all said that periods will be painful. That it was normal to cramp, that it was normal to be in pain. And so that's what I expected. I remember one day I'm going to say grade 6, so by this time I would have had my period for a couple of months. I went to the sick bay. I think I bled through, and I was having really bad cramping and nausea. And I spoke to the nurse, and she asked me, how long have you had your period? Or like, how long has your period been going? And I remember telling her, oh, about a month. And she got kind of grumpy with me. She was like, no, I don't want to know how long you've had your period in your life. I want to know how long this particular period has been. And I was like, yes, a month. And she was like, I don't believe you. It hasn't been. It would have been a couple of days. You don't need to exaggerate. And I was like, no, I've had it for a month. And she brushed me off. And so I kind of had started to realize that, like, maybe my experience is a little bit different than some other people's, but also I might not be believed in what I tell people. Which as a kid, you kind of go, oh, adults don't believe me. I just won't say anything. Now, I say that my mum knew that my period was going on for a period of time because she was the one buying me products. So it's not that I didn't think my family would believe me. It was just like other adults wouldn't. And so I guess I just kind of stopped talking to people about it. Then after I had my period for a few years, I moved on to high school, and we had, in Australia anyway, some magazines that were marketed towards teenage girls, a Dolly magazine and Girlfriend magazine, and they used to have a sealed section in the back that was all about health, sex, puberty, life, and people could write in and ask questions. And I remember seeing an article that someone had posted, or a question that someone had asked, and it had talked about some symptoms they were experiencing. There was excess hair growth, acne, and periods that were not regular. And by regular, we kind of mean like a once a month for a couple of days situation. Yeah, so I was reading the response that the either advisor or doctor or whoever it was that responded to these questions had written. And it basically said, if you are experiencing some of these symptoms, so the excess hair growth, in places that are not typically female or feminine places to grow hair, so chin, mustache area, chest, shoulders, stomach, etc., back, then and on top of that you've got irregular periods, you might have some bad acne, or periods that last a long time, then maybe you have something called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I remember reading this, and I would have been somewhere between 16 and 18. And I cut out the question and I took it to my mum and I said, can I go to the doctor because I think that I might have this? And I still have the cut out somewhere, which I'll find, and I'll see if I can pop an image of it up. And to my mum's credit, she said, yep, let's take you to the doctor, have a chat with them and see what they think. So I went and saw my doctor, male doctor, Dr. John, and also to his credit, he listened. He took on what I said my symptoms were, and he said, okay, well, if you think this is something that you have, let's get you some blood tests and an ultrasound done, and I'll refer you to a specialist. And you can talk it through with them, see if it is something and if you need help. And now, as an adult, understanding how lucky I was that I had a doctor that paid attention to a teenager, particularly a female teenager, that said, hey, something's wrong with my body and I want to get it looked at. I'm very appreciative. I'm so grateful that he listened and he acted on it, because I know of so many people that aren't as lucky as that didn't have the help that I received. And so yes, I feel very blessed in that, even though I didn't get diagnosed with endometriosis until much more recently, I did get diagnosed with polycystic. And so I went to a gynecologist and had an ultrasound, and they confirmed that at the time I had something along the lines of 30 plus ovaries in my 30 plus ovaries. That would be interesting. 30 plus cysts in my right ovary and 40 plus in my left. And that my hormones were a bit out of whack, and that, yes, I did have polycystic ovarian syndrome. And for those of you that don't know, polycystic is caused by a lot of, is it caused by hormone imbalances or does it create them? Typically, you will have symptoms of a imbalance of hormones, with testosterone typically being a lot higher than expected or elevated, which is a causer for the excess hair growth, which I do have. I actually need to fix mine at the moment because I haven't done it. But I can pretty much grow a full beard, which is not very feminine, doesn't make you feel very good. Holding of body fat in places that are more male patterned. So by that, I mean, instead of having, like I'm a heavy girl, but instead of having the weight distributed kind of evenly across my body, breasts, hips, thighs, etc., most of my weight, and you can't really see it in what I'm wearing, and given that I'm here, but is centered around my stomach. So I have, I guess, similar to what you would call like a beer gut that a guy would have. That's where my fat tends to hold itself. The rest of my body, like my face is pudgy, my arms do have fat on them, but most of my weight is centered there. Weight gain is something else that can be a symptom of polycystic, and having polycystic can cause you to gain weight. Gaining weight can cause you to have worse polycystic because it messes with your hormones, which can cause you to have more weight, which can cause you to have worse polycystic, and it's just a cycle. It also means it's really hard for a lot of people that have polycystic to maintain a healthy weight, something which I've never been able to do. I've definitely worked on it a lot over the last 20 years and haven't really been successful. And that will be important in my endo journey, but I'll get to that. So at the time of diagnosis of polycystic, they basically said, let's pop you on some birth control. That should hopefully help even out your hormones a bit. We'll reassess from there. Kind of asked about the periods and stuff, and I said, yeah, with polycystic, they'll either be really irregular, and that irregularity can be that you'll get one month and then not again for a year. You'll get them twice in a month, like it's just super irregular. So I kind of didn't question when my period was just wacky. And I didn't question the pain behind my period because, again, I'd been taught that pain was normal. So they put me on birth control, and then now understanding myself better, I have ADHD. I am very bad at taking medication regularly. So being on the pill meant that I would take it for a couple of days, forget, be off it for a month, be back on it, take it for a week, forget it for a couple of days, take it again. It was just a cycle. So they never really got under control. medication is something that I've worked really hard on making sure that I do take at the right times now. It was not something I could do then. So yeah, so look, years went on and didn't really question much. I did decide to try an IUD, primarily because I'm not good at taking medication. I did want to get my health under control, so around 2018, 2019, this time at the age of like, oh, what age was I then? Mid to late 20s. I decided an IUD might be the way to go. Primarily because I didn't have to think. And that might be a bit of a cop-out for some people, but if I didn't have to think about taking a medication every day, remembering to do it at the same time, and possibly forgetting, then it just made sense to have an IUD. For me, anyway. So I had one placed. We decided to do it under general anaesthetic. And they decided that they would do a hysteroscopy, a D&C, and the insertion all together, mostly because I wanted to make sure that everything was working the way it was meant to work. And whilst I was under, they noticed that I had a polyp within my uterus, which they removed. And then I was sent home. Recovery, I bled a lot. I bled for about a month straight, which is typical. It can be. And I was in a lot of pain. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. It was uncomfortable. But after about a month and a half, it dissipated. And from then on, I was fine. I had a period for the first couple of months afterwards, and then it slowly just petered down to pretty much nothing, which was fantastic. And without the periods, I didn't really get cramping. That was massive for me because the cramping, the way that I've always experienced my cramping is excruciating. I would be doubled over. I would get hot and cold sweats. I would get shakes. I would get nausea. I would get headaches. And I was pretty much not able to do a lot during that time. I would take time off school, and then just lie on the bed with a heat pack, crying, not knowing why it was so difficult for me. Because I had friends that would get periods and they'd last 2 to 3 days, and they'd tell me that like the pain wasn't that bad, that they just take a Nurofen or a Panadol and that they then felt fine. And I was like, man, I am struggling. Like, maybe I'm just weak. Maybe I don't have a pain tolerance. And that's a terrible thing to think, but that's what I did think. That this was a me problem, that I just couldn't deal with it. So then with the IUD, to not have a period, awesome. To not have that kind of pain, awesome. So I had that one in for 5 years. Things were great. The recommendation at the time was that you get your IUD replaced every 5 years. I believe for contraceptive purposes, that has changed slightly. I think it's now 7 years for Mirena IUD. I might be wrong on that, but I believe it has been extended. My specialist gynecologist has suggested to me that we still stick with the 5 years because for my polycystic and for my endometriosis, that's actually probably a better timescale. So we decided that we would try in the chair to place a new Marina. So we went to an appointment, laid down, she took out the old Marina. That's fine, that didn't hurt, that barely felt anything, to be honest, which, fantastic, I will take that. And then we tried to insert the new one, and my body kind of just said no. Tried to be as relaxed as possible. It wasn't super painful, it was definitely uncomfortable, but my gynecologist decided that, hey, let's not continue this because your body clearly isn't wanting to accept it. I would much rather stop and put you back under, go through that process again, and have you be okay. And I was like, okay, that's fine, let's do that. So middle of 2024, I went back to hospital, had another hysteroscopy, a D&C, and a new Marina insertion. There was a few months, I want to say like 2 months, in between getting one removed and one put in. Now I'm wondering if that caused me some issues with my hormones, that maybe my hormones started to adjust a little bit because I wasn't getting that stable hormone come through with the IUD. I don't know, I'm speculating. But I do wonder if that bit of time in between just maybe spurred things along a little bit. So I went back to hospital, had the procedure done. Upon waking, she told me that I had another polyp that they also removed. And she said, from memory, I believe she said it's not super common to have had one grow within that amount of time, particularly with an IUD. Now, I could be misremembering, I was still a bit groggy, but I remember thinking like, oh, okay, that's a little bit strange, good to know. So we'll see what happens for me tomorrow when I get this IUD removed and a new one placed. If there has been any growth in my uterus or if there hasn't, because it's only been just under 2 years since I had the last one placed. So now I guess we kind of move forward from my second Marina to maybe 6 months after it. I had the same kind of symptoms and issues with the new Marina that I did with the old one, in that I had about a month worth of bleeding, a month and a half, month worth of pain. When I say pain, it's like the cramping feeling I get with periods, a little bit of movement, but I'm gonna say manageable. Very uncomfortable, but not like, I wanted to say it's fine, and now I'm wondering if I'm downplaying it, but that's how I got through it at the time, was it's fine. And so again, I was fine with the Marina after that. It progressed normally. And I from memory, I had it placed in like the April-May period of 24. Towards the end of 24, so like November, December, I noticed that I was starting to get some pelvic discomfort. But I wasn't really bleeding because the Marina had pretty much stopped that. And then I started bleeding again. So kind of like November, December, bit of blood here and there, and I'm like, this is a bit strange. Oh, I've got some bad cramping. And then I was getting pain outside of the bleeding, which was not normal. And I kind of let it go for a little bit. I think I got to February of 25, and I was like, this is really uncomfortable. I'm getting a lot of pelvic pain, which I kind of hadn't experienced outside of cramps and periods until then. And I was like, something just feels wrong, and I couldn't explain why. But I decided that maybe it was a smart idea to go and get an STD test, because sometimes things don't pop up for a while. I've only had one partner, but you never know. So went and got one of those done. Everything came back clear. And then I went, okay, well, I've got an appointment with my gynecologist coming up for a regular checkup. Let me go to that. Let me wait until that, and then I'll go and get checked. So that wasn't until like April. And when I went and saw her, I said, look, I'm having a lot of pain. I don't know what to do. I'm bleeding, which I wasn't anticipating. And I showed her like my period log on my app, and she was like, that's unusual, particularly given that you didn't have problems last time. So maybe what we'll do is we'll send you for an ultrasound, because I'm worried that the marina might have moved. Maybe it's in the wrong spot, which was a bit daunting. I did know that that could happen, because when I jump into a medical issue, or a surgery or a new medication, I do like to do a bit of a deep dive to make sure I know what I'm getting myself into. And so I was like, okay, let's go get the ultrasound and see what happens. Went to the ultrasound, they looked around, they said, no, your IUD's in place, it's not perforating your uterus, it's exactly where it needs to be. She said, your uterus is a little bit, your uterus lining is a little bit thicker than I anticipate, particularly for someone who does have an IUD, which I thought was interesting. And looking back on my documentation from my very first ultrasound back in, like when I was a teenager, where I got diagnosed with polycystic, it said there that I had a bulky uterus. And then she's now told me that the thickness of the lining is a bit thicker than she anticipated. And so I kept that in mind. And then once she sort of confirmed that the IUD was where it was meant to be, she had a look around at everything else. And she did note that my left ovary was difficult to find, and then she did find it, but it was behind my uterus, and it appeared to be kind of stuck there. And she'd moved the ultrasound around, so it was an internal ultrasound. She'd move the wand around, and she'd be like, it feels like it's getting stuck in this particular position. And then she'd move it somewhere else, and she'd move it back. She's like, yeah, something's just not quite right. And as she was doing that, she then said to me, have you ever been diagnosed with endometriosis? And I told her, no, I haven't, but I had always kind of wondered if that was something that I might have a problem with, primarily because I had heard that polycystic and endo can go hand in hand. They can be comorbidities. And so she did a bit more searching, and she said, oh, I can see a nodule here and I can see a nodule here, and given that I can't move this around easily, I'm going to assume or guess that you've got some adhesions here which are basically sticking things together. So I left that ultrasound appointment going, yay, my IUD's fine. Crap, something else is wrong. And I had always wondered if I'd had endometriosis. I remember talking to someone that does have it, and I had said that to them, and they'd said to me, oh, no, you would know if you had endometriosis. And given that I already thought that I had a low pain tolerance or threshold, and that I just couldn't handle periods well, I kind of just agreed with her and went, oh, yeah, you're probably right. I guess I would know if I had it. What I have can't be bad enough. And so I just gaslit myself and didn't listen to my body. And so this was kind of like having the ultrasound and getting a diagnosis was kind of affirming. But then it meant that I had to start a whole new journey. And I guess this is probably the bit that you're actually more interested in if you've clicked on an endometriosis journey. So I went back to my gynecologist after the ultrasound, and we kind of discussed the endo. And she said, oh, I don't know if that's what's causing you pain or not. let's try you on some medication and see how you go. Because if you're bleeding all the time, and at that point I was bleeding every couple of days, and I'd bleed for like 2 or 3 days. It would be like small spotting, but it was still bleeding. And then it would stop for a day or two, and it would start again. And so in a month, I would have bled more than I wouldn't have bled, which was exhausting because you didn't know if you needed to take something with you, if you're going to work or out with friends or anything. You just couldn't plan, and so maybe you just wear period underwear all the time, or maybe look cute, or maybe you just make sure you're carrying something or you've got something in the car. And she was like, so if that's happening all the time, that's not a quality of life. We need to do something. So she decided to try me on estrogel, which is basically a liquid gel that you rub into your skin on your arm. And she was hoping that would stop my bleeding. And to be fair, it did. It stopped my bleeding, but it only stopped my bleeding for like 2 months. And we were going to review it on the 3rd month. And in the 3rd month, the bleeding started again, and it didn't stop. So when I went back for my review and said, hey, it worked, but now it's not working, she went, okay. If that didn't help, maybe we do need to do some more. And I said, yeah, look, I'm in a lot of pain. I'm getting pain when I'm bleeding, when I'm not bleeding, and because I was at that point, and it was starting to become excruciating. And so it felt like things really ramped up from like November till June last year. It was just escalating. And she kind of seemed a bit hesitant to send me to someone. And I was like, look, I'm struggling. And she was like, okay, let's get you in to see someone. Do you know who you'd like to see? And I had done a bit of research prior. I'd looked around and I had heard that Professor Jim Soltis, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, had some really good recommendations from a lot of people online, and decided that maybe I'd like to go see him. And she said to me, oh, good, he's actually a close friend and associate. He's probably who I would have sent you to anyway. So that was good. So she sent off a referral for me, and in the meantime I just had to sit and wait. And it was a wait. I didn't manage to get an appointment until October last year. So from like June, when I got my referral, to October, we're talking, a number of months. And in the interim, the pain got worse. The regularity got worse. To the point where some days I just didn't know what to do with myself. There were a couple of days I called off sick from work because I would be up all night in either pain or having bowel issues. So one of my symptoms with my endo is pain with bowel movements, irregular bowel movements, and pain with gas. And so sometimes I'd, get up in the middle of the night, go to the loo, and I'd be there for an hour or two. And then I'd come back to bed and I'd be in pain, and then I'd have to go again. And I was like, this is not good. But it was all pelvic based, it felt like period cramps. And that was the only way I could describe it to anyone. And so during this waiting period, other symptoms started popping up. I was getting vulval pain that would just kind of shoot like lightning zaps through my vulva. I was getting rectal pain, same kind of thing. It was like zapping, I don't want to say through my butthole because that sounds terrible, but it's kind of what it felt like just like red hot, like I'd sat on a knife. And they'd hit at work. And I'd just have to pretend like I was fine. Because what do? Tell your mate next to you, oh, it's all right, just the zapping in my butthole. Like, that's not cool. And that would be weird and probably really inappropriate. And so you just kind of sit there and you're like, yeah, I'm in pain. Or you'll get yourself up and you'll go to the bathroom and you'll sit there for a bit in pain, and then you're starting to get anxious because you're like, they're going to notice that I've been away from my desk for a while. And it becomes a cycle. So when I finally got to my appointment, I took my partner with me, and the whole appointment was really reaffirming. And it was, I guess now, again, similar to when I was a teenager and going to my GP. Going to this specialist now, he listened and he didn't judge and he validated. And that meant a lot. So we sat down, we went through my history. He started talking about my polycystic and my weight struggles and my type 2 diabetes and my fatty liver and my sleep apnea. And he kind of said, you've been dealt a really bad hand. He said, your polycystic is basically, how do I put it? Not it has caused those things, but it has pushed those forward. Okay, so you probably wouldn't have type 2 if you didn't have your polycystic. You probably wouldn't have sleep apnea because you wouldn't have the same kind of weight gain. You wouldn't struggle to keep your weight off and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, thank gosh a doctor isn't telling me you've got issues because you're fat, because I've had that before. I've had that through different specialists. I've had that through random GPs that I've gone to for like, I've got a cold, I need a medical certificate, and they're like, you're fat, you need to work on that. You're not strict enough with yourself, you don't care enough about yourself. And I'm like, no, I struggle. And so to hear this specialist validate my experience, my life, my medical history, and be like, you're not at fault, your body is working against you, felt really good. It was also like slightly upsetting because I was like, why have I not had one do that? But I really appreciate that he didn't make me feel like a POS for how I presented. And we had some really good discussions about health and basically what my next steps are. And so we said, yeah, your next steps basically is surgery. And so this was in October 25. And he let me know what the risks were with the surgery. And he let me know that he was unable to currently perform it because of my BMI. And now keep in mind, I've said he was really validating and really reaffirming. And he continued to be. So he wasn't like, you're fat, I can't do your surgery. He was like, hey, so I want to talk to you about the serious safety implications that a surgery like this has and what we need to do to get you surgery ready. Because currently the risk is too high for me to perform it. And it wasn't, you're at fault, you haven't looked after yourself. It was, hey, I want to make this safe for you, and to do that, we need to do this. And so part of that discussion was basically the need to lose weight. And that's a really hard conversation for me. I have a lot of mental health issues around weight and weight loss and weight gain. I've always been a big girl. I've always struggled to lose weight. And I've had, like I said, a lot of mental health issues around it. Now, I know that I I have type 2 diabetes, and that whilst polycystic ovarian syndrome can make the prevalence of type 2 diabetes higher and more likely, that me being overweight will have made that happen a lot earlier than it could have, and it could get a lot worse quickly. So I have been taking medication for my diabetes up to that point. I was taking metformin. And I had just started taking Ozempic. And when I say just, like, I'd started on the 16th of October and my appointment was on like the 28th of October or something. So like I'd literally just started. And he sort of said, yeah, cool, good, because we do need you to lose some weight so we can do this surgery. I want you to stick to that. And I want you to come back in February for a follow-up. I want to get a new ultrasound done because it will have been about a year since your last. And I want to see how you're progressing weight-wise. And if you're progressing, then we can look at performing a surgery. And he let me know that basically they needed my BMI to be under 40 to be able to do the surgery, but also that the lower it could get, the better chances I would have with the outcomes for surgery. And so your risks do go up the more you weigh. The higher your BMI, the higher all these risks just go, like they escalate. One of the risks he mentioned is currently my main concern is failure to enter or to gain entry. And so for a laparoscopy, they start off by going through your belly button, they make an incision, they blow up your abdomen with air, and then put some different devices in. They put a camera in and some instruments. They'll put a couple of other holes around in your abdomen as well, and so they can get to all the different places they want to get to. He said with people who have a higher BMI and their fat mass tends to sit around their stomach, which mine does with my polycystic, sometimes they can fail to enter properly. And if they fail to enter, then they can't proceed with the surgery. So that's currently my main anxiety point. And I'll probably get to why in a little bit, but yeah, so he said from October to Feb, let's reassess, let's reevaluate, let's get you a new ultrasound, and let's go from there. So from October to February, I continued taking my Ozempic, and I lost some weight. Since October, I don't really like talking numbers because I feel really ashamed of my weight and where it got to, and then I also know that it could have been a lot worse. And I know that numbers do matter for people. So at my highest, I believe my highest recorded was 124 kilos. That would have been like February last year. And by last year, I mean 2025. When I went to my appointment and started Ozempic, I was 120. In Feb, I had gotten myself down to 102. So I'd lost, let's say, from October to Feb, something like 18 to 20 kilos, which is like awesome. And he had given me a goal of 100, so I was just above it. And I went to my before I went to my February appointment, I went and had a new ultrasound done. During that ultrasound, we confirmed that I had some nodules, that my patch of Douglas has adhesions, and that I did still need surgery, not that that really would have changed. And we'd also discussed the possibility of having, of me also having adenomyosis. Excuse me. And during this ultrasound, the tech said she believed that I did, because again, the lining of my uterus was thicker than anticipated, that the uterus presents as bulky, and through some other stuff, they're like, yeah, we think you've got adenomyosis as well as endometriosis. And they reconfirmed that I had polycystic, which again, we already knew. So I went to my February appointment with my surgeon. We had a chat and he was like, you are looking awesome. You've lost some weight. That's exactly what we needed. Where are we at? Where can we go from here? And he then said he was going to move the benchmark. So sweet. You got pretty much to 100. I think you can do better. Let's aim for 90 to 95. And mentally I struggled with that. I was already struggling with the whole weight loss thing. And internally I was like, oh crap. He's now going to tell me that we still can't do the surgery. And I was like, look, I'm losing around about 1 kilo a week at the moment. If that progression continues, then hopefully, you know, I'll be there soon. And he was like, no, I'm pretty sure you will be. So let's book you in for end of April for surgery. And they was just like, oh wait, the got lifted off my shoulders. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, this is actually going to happen. He said, but I do still need you to stick to your weight loss, your healthy eating, all of that stuff. Stick with your Ozempic. But when we get closer to the surgery, you will have to stop the Ozempic a couple of weeks beforehand so that your body can kind of like purge the medication and you won't have the symptoms of the medication when it comes to surgery. So a big symptom, which is kind of one of the intended symptoms for people using Ozempic or the name brand Wegovy, which is marketed for weight loss. Ozempic is marketed specifically for diabetes. One of the intended symptoms is slower gastric emptying, which means that the food that you eat stays in your stomach longer. Like longer than it normally would to be digested. But when it comes to surgery, they prefer you to not have that symptom happen, primarily because of how the surgery happens. So in talking to him about the surgery, he's really good in that he like explains what they do and how they do it, which I like science. I'm a bit of a nerd. This stuff's really cool to hear. He basically said during the surgery, instead of being flat on a bed, they tip you like 30 degrees with your head down the bottom and your feet up the top, so that I believe he said your bladder could move itself out of the way. So all of your organs kind of like free float within your body. And if they tip you, basically your bladder will just plop out the way. And then when they go in laparoscopically, they don't have to try and move it, because if they try to move it, they could puncture it, they could damage it. But if it just flops out of the way, then they can look at your uterus, your ovaries, all your other pelvic stuff easier. He also explained that in order to gain access to the pouch of Douglas, which is behind your uterus, it's between your uterus and your rectum, or your colon, bowels, basically, that they will insert a couple of instruments. One, they'll insert vaginally, and then one rectally, and then they basically tilt them back and forth. So when they lift it up, they're lifting the uterus out the way and then allowing like entry between to where the patch Douglas is. So you're upside down. yeah, you're upside down and they like manipulate these while your bladder's out the way. Really interesting stuff. But because of all that, they need you to not have anything in your stomach. So the Ozempic needs to have stopped. They need you to be able to have less problems breathing. So I have sleep apnea, which is exacerbated by my weight. So losing weight means that my throat will be more open during surgery, so that intubation is less of an issue. I have a dog snoring in the background. So these are some of the reasons why like losing weight was so important. So yeah, so he said, keep it up, stop the Ozempic 2 weeks before. Your anaesthetist will give you more information on that, and we'll go from there. And so I did that. My weight continued to drop. I continued to make sure I was eating the right things, because whilst, yes, I'm on Ozempic, you can stay the same weight and still be using Ozempic if you don't make life changes. If you make life changes, the weight is likely to come off. It's basically an appetite suppressant, and like I said, it also delays gastric emptying. So he said, keep it up. And I did. And I continued to lose weight. And I got down to about 94 and a half. So that's like 25 kilos from where I started in October, which again, awesome. Mentally, my brain still hasn't caught up with it, and I don't see the difference in myself. Other people are noticing it, but I'm struggling. And I feel weird when people mention it, but I also feel weird when people don't mention it, because then I feel like there's just something hanging there, but they're like, oh, she's clearly lost weight. And I don't know if they just don't want to say something because they think I'm fat, and that then I'll be upset. It's a really weird mental spot to be in. Yeah. As you've noticed, I have ADHD. I flitter around, so I apologise. It's raw and unfiltered. But yeah, so I got down to 94 and a half, which, awesome. And then I had to stop taking the Ozempic. And I was still 4.5 kilos off where I wanted to be, because he said 90 to 95. Now that does mean it's a bracket, it's a window. But I'm stubborn. And I wanted the 90. And I didn't get to it. And so I stopped the Ozempic. I continued to eat correctly. And I tried to make sure I wasn't increasing my meal sizes or my portions or anything like that, and that I wasn't eating things that I shouldn't. And my weight started stacking back on. It jumped up to 97 and a half. Or was it 97.9, almost 98 the other day? And I'm like, he wanted me under 100, but he wanted me closer to the other end of that. So I've started getting anxious and stressing about failure to enter during surgery. And like I said, my surgery is tomorrow. This morning, I think my weight, I'll have to double check, but I think it was like 95.3-ish. So let's say it's in the ballpark of 95. It's not going to drastically change by tomorrow. I know that. But I am stressed about it. So I guess that's kind of my journey from before being diagnosed, growing up with health problems, to now. I'll make another video on like the surgery itself and the prep that I've had to do for it outside of losing weight. I might try and put up a picture of my weight before and my weight after. Like, there is a difference, and I know there's a difference, but I struggle mentally with it. And yeah, I guess I'm excited about tomorrow. I'm apprehensive about tomorrow. I'd love some more answers. I want to know what stage endometriosis I have. I want to know how bad they think my adenomyosis is. If there's anything else wrong, I'm hoping it helps to fix my pain. I know that surgery doesn't fix everyone. I know there's a chance it won't fix me, but I won't know if it will or not until I've tried it. Yeah. I don't know, there's lots of thoughts and feelings going through my mind at the moment. The surgery itself, I'm not worried about. Like, they're specialists. They know what they're doing. I do it regularly. I know there's been a lot of controversy around endometriosis surgery in Melbourne, Victoria, where I live. There are some real concerns. I believe I have a good surgeon. I'm grateful that I haven't had to experience or endure what some of the other women have. Yeah, I feel really grateful for that, and I feel really sad that other people have been through awful things. And I guess, I don't know, we'll see how I go tomorrow. But yeah, I'm not worried about the surgery itself outside of failure to failure to enter. I'm more worried about the recovery and how I'll go with that. Mostly because I've got these guys, and this little one, who's not so little, is 1.5 years old, and she hasn't figured out what personal space is. And if I'm having incisions, I don't want her jumping on me. She normally sleeps with us. She likes to sleep right up against me. She'll stand on me when she wants to get close for a cuddle. She thinks she's being cute, doesn't realise her size or her weight. And I'm not going to be able to deal with that. So we'll see. But for the moment, I guess this was my endo journey up until today, and then I'll post some stuff about where we go tomorrow. I don't know, wish me luck. Bye.